part of 128, and I heard that there is a stalled car in another part. So we pushed back the time, but we're still going to let you out on time at the end of the day. So we had an hour and a half blocked out for lunch. It's been knocked down to an hour now. But I'm gonna jump into this because I've got a hard stop time as well. So there are each one of you guys are really good at something. I think that each one of us have a unique ability that God has given us. And in this unique ability, you probably are intuitively good at that. And other people who want to develop strengths in those areas where you are intuitively good have to be more intentional about that. Does that make sense? So if like you're intuitively a good cook, other people, if I want to be a good cook, I'm not intuitively a good cook, so I have to be more intentional about learning to cook than you do because it comes so natural for you. Does that make sense? So one of those intuitive things for us, I think, is the way that our church is able to connect with people who aren't very, very churchy. And I had a friend of mine push back and said, Sean, until you figure out what it is about you guys that God has used to connect with people who are farthest from Him, it's not going to be repeatable. He said, because what you're intuitively good at, I have to be intentional to be good at. And so that conversation and the questions that he began asking us helped shape kind of what I'm going to share with you guys. So I'm a pastor's kid, was raised in a church my entire life. Any other preacher kids here, by the way? A few? Oh, rock on. More than I thought. How many of us were raised in church our entire lives? Anybody? Who's kind of new to faith since becoming an adult? Just so I see who's in the room. All right, great. I'm glad all of you guys are here, regardless of your spiritual history. But my mom and dad raised us in a Christian home. They put us in a Christian school. And I think the reason why my mom and dad I'm not against Christian schools. I'm just against the ones that my mom and dad put me in, is the way that works. Because they were trying to keep me away from everybody that my faith was intended to benefit, right? What they ended up doing is put me in a school with all the kids who have been kicked out of the public schools. And so truthfully, my school is probably more shady than any school they would have ever put me in, a public school. But my entire life had been lived around people who shared my worldview. Then I went to a Christian college, got a Christian degree, graduated, and went to go work for a Christian church. And it wasn't until I was 31 years old when I moved here to Boston to teach at a college in the city. I wanted to, someday church planting was on our radar, maybe when I was more mature, that kind of a thing, maybe in my 40s or something like that. Now I'm almost 50, so it never happened for me, the maturity part. But we ended up in Stoughton, and not because that was a strategic thing for us. I needed to be near Taco Bell because Jesus loves Mexicans. That's in the Bible. It's in the original Hebrew. And my wife needed to be near Walmart, and at the time, Stoughton was equidistant between the only Taco Bell. This is like an 01. Taco Bell, which is in North Stoughton, and Walmart, which is in North Brockton, right? So our house was in between. That's proof there's a God if you're a skeptic. But the house we bought then was on Sears Street here in Stoughton. And for the first time in my life, none of my friends shared my worldview. And so for the first time in my life, I had skin in the game. Now my best friends were not followers of Jesus. And we began begging God to send somebody to reach them. And He wasn't answering that prayer, I thought. But the truth is, He already had, because we got our house there, right? So as a professor in the city, I got involved in Little League and the school council at the elementary school my kids were at. We had them in Christian school too, because if you're raised in Christian school, they ingrain in you that public schools are evil, which we found out isn't true. So they might have even lied to us. But we put our kids in Christian school until we couldn't afford it. My wife got pregnant and couldn't work anymore, and so we couldn't afford to keep them in private school, put them in public school. We said if they're going to be in public school, then dang it, those public school teachers are at least going to know who we are, and they're going to see us as an asset so that we can speak into what's happening here, because we thought for sure they'd turn them into Satanists or something. Wasn't like that at all. It ended up being one of the best things, not only for our family and for the spiritual formation of my own children, but also for what God was going to do through Grace Church. So I got involved in Little League, and I started putting my youth pastor skills to work. And with just our Little League basketball program in town, I got 100 tickets to Celtics, and all the coaches got to get their kids, get a high five from Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and Kevin Garnett back in those days. And that opened up a whole lot of doors for me in the community and to be on the board of directors for the oldest Little League board in town. It's a lifetime position, so nobody but townies get that spot. until I got it. I had a friend of mine say, how in the world did that happen? I wanted to say, it's the hand of God, but I didn't want to freak him out. So I was like, I don't know, but just wanted to bring value, right? And until my neighbors across the street had a friend attempt suicide. And they knew that I was religious. I taught at a Christian college. And she told her friend, you need God and my neighbor knows him. I'll be right back. And then she came and knocked on our door. We went to Good Sam's, right? Good Samaritan Hospital here in Brockton. And my non-religious, non-church neighbor said to her non-religious, unchurched friend, you need to be in a Bible study. If Sean and Billy Jane started a Bible study, would you go to it? And she said, yeah, if you and your husband Glenn will go. And she goes, okay, Sean? So my wife and I have been praying for God to give us some kind of a sign whether or not we should start this church. And we figure when pagans are starting our church for us, in our house without our permission, next sign from God was going to be a lightning bolt to my butt is what that was going to be about. So I lived intentionally. And my wife and I, since we first got married, we put a piece of paper on the back side of our front door that had, our street and then squares where all the houses were. And we had, the X for the square that we live in. And then as we would find out our neighbors' names, we would put their names in it. And here in New England, November hits and we all hibernate until April. And so we bought our house on Halloween. Actually, the 30th is when we bought our 29th, something like 2 days before Halloween in 2002. And started meeting our neighbors, wrote their names down. So when we came out in spring, we still remember their names because we've been praying for them by name all winter long. That made an impression on them. And I wanted to become the neighbor that all the neighbors knew, even if the neighbors didn't know each other. Right? And so my best friends became all of the people on Sears Street. What God's done over the course of time, it didn't happen all right away, but I'll give it to you in order. But Glenn and Tiffany, and across the street from us, saved and baptized at Grace Church. Bim and Mary, saved and baptized at Grace Church. Catty corner behind us, Carlos and Michelle, he's one of our elders now, saved and baptized at Grace Church. Across the street, 3 doors down, Dave and Michelle Massarelli, saved and baptized at Grace Church. Across the street next door, Savannah Gardner and her 2 grandsons saved and baptized at Grace Church. The next door neighbors over here speak Portuguese, no English. Some homeboys, if they're going to have a chance to find and follow Jesus, homeboys got to learn Portuguese. These neighbors over here used to be atheists. They're agnostics. I call that improvement. These people over here, Jeff and Susan had just started coming to Grace Church before he got this huge promotion to move to Kansas City. And so they've been gone. They just started coming to our church. Now the people that moved in there now are atheistic Jewish people. So I told my wife, I said, well, when the Haggertys and Carol and Robert come to faith in Jesus, then we can move to a new neighborhood and start all over. And she said, nope. When the Haggertys and Carol and Robert come to faith in Jesus, then our neighborhood will be just like we want it. So we're staying. And it's that idea that our faith, if it doesn't benefit the people that we actually live around, I don't know if we're doing our life like Jesus did his. Okay? That's that 80s slow clap in the back. Then it starts to pick up. Love that. But yeah, that's truthfully, Jesus spent most of his, he recruited his disciples, and he said, if you follow me, I'm going to make you a fisher of what? I'm going to make you a fisher of men. The end result of your closeness to me is your focus on those farthest from me. That was the evidence that they were following Jesus, is their connections to people who weren't. Yes, sir. Excellent. If you don't mind, I'm going to get it. But that is the point of this entire session. That's the point. Because I need to hit. So he's already with me. But truth is, I really do have to spend time convincing pastors this is their job. And that's sad. Because as a church planter, when my salary was being paid by the 54 churches around the country that were giving us $100 a month and a little pat on the hiney, go get them, Tiger, I could take risks because I didn't need the offerings from the church people to pay my bills. Other churches were paying my bills. But at year 4, year 5, when those churches stopped sending in their support to help our church get started, now I started being dependent on the people that were in our congregation, and I felt in me the shift from offense to defense, and it scared me. You see what I'm saying? Like at the beginning, you'll take the risks, right? But then once you got something to lose, you stop. You do. You leave the mission out of self-preservation, not realizing it was the number one thing that led you to stagnation, and it rhymes, so it must be true. It must be true. There are 3 personal assumptions. Let me start with the assumptions. I can make these assumptions about him. I want to be able to make these assumptions about you. Number 1 is this, is that you already know how to lead someone to a personal commitment of faith in Jesus. So I'm not going to, there's in a class on how to lead someone to the Lord. This is an altar call training. That isn't what this is going to be. I'm going to assume you already know that. Number 2, I'm going to assume that you already know it's important to share your faith. Number 3, and I'm assuming that you want to be more effective in sharing your faith. So number 1, you know how to do it. You already know it's important, and you want to get better at it. Those are the 3 assumptions I'm making. There are 3 biblical assumptions I think we should all make at all times. The first biblical assumption that we're going to make is this, that the entire point of being a follower of Jesus is helping others follow Jesus. It was the first thing he said to his disciples, and it was the last thing he said to his disciples, and he spent 3 years showing them how to do it. And during that time, he was called a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors, and hookers. And it was the religious crowd who had the biggest problem with him. He spent 3 years showing the disciples what it actually looked like. Number 2, the second biblical assumption is that the closer you get to Jesus, the more you care about those who are far from him. I just said that, but that's the entire chapter of Luke chapter 15. It's the only time Jesus repeated himself, not just once, but he repeated himself twice, 3 different times. Read all 3 parables. We're not going to do that for the sake of time. You can read it on your own. Number 3, what Christians think of me getting close to lost people is irrelevant. Can I say this also? That your church doesn't exist for Christians. Your church is Christians. My body does not exist for my hand. Now, there's a tangible benefit to my hand being a part of this body, but the purpose of this body is not this hand. Now, truthfully, when this hand is bleeding, the whole body stops doing its mission to focus on. So there are tangible benefits to the hand for being a part of the body, but the purpose of the body is not this hand. Do you get what I'm saying? So I'm not saying there's not a tangible benefit to being part of a local congregation as a follower of Jesus, but what I'm saying is that the purpose of your local body of believers is not the comfort of your hand. It's not the comfort of its individual members of the body. Your body's got a mission. Are you with me? Okay. Jesus referred in Luke chapter 7, verse 34, he was a glutton and a drunkard, and I don't think he cared what people said about him. He said, I came to do the work whereunto I have been sent, which is to seek and to save those who are lost. In Ephesians chapter 4, where the scripture says that he gave some apostles, prophets, evangelists, preachers, and teachers for the equipping of the saints for 2 things. The work of the ministry. What's the work of the ministry? The rescue of the lost. And the building up of the body of Christ. Why do we build up the body of Christ? We just get fat and pumped? What's that for? To get better at what? Reaching the lost. That's the whole point. So our job is to equip people to do their job, which is helping their friends and family find and follow Jesus, right? And to build each other up so that each one of them can get better at what? Helping their friends and family find and follow Jesus. So here are 3 things, here we go, 3 things that you need to start doing right now that will help you actually do what God's called everyone to do. They all start with P's because I was raised Baptist, so they all have to start with the same letter. All right? First one is this. What you need is, number 1, proximity. The problem with most of us as pastors is once we hit 100 people, now we have enough Christians to fill our 40, 50 hours a week. That we get distracted from what we're actually here for. There's enough Christians for me to take care of, to keep me from what I'm actually sent here to do. Right? Proximity. Jesus was a friend of publicans and sinners. And you've heard this before. It's easy to press someone from a distance, but you can only impact them up close. how many actual people who are far from God would say that they are close to you? Most pastors say that they have friends who are lost. Ready? Like what most people of one race say that they're friends with people of another race. Okay, you know somebody's name who's a different race, but that doesn't mean they'd ever invite you over to their barbecue. You see what I'm saying? The question is not, do you have friends who are far from God? The question is, do your friends who are far from God invite you over to their house to watch the first game of the World Series? Because Jesus was invited to hang out and go to parties with lost people, and he went. When they got drunk, he stayed. We don't. We work really hard not to be seen with the very people Jesus worked to be with. Are you with me? Like, that's a legit question. How many people who don't go to your church, who are far from God, actually have asked you to come over? And if we can't think of anybody, we might not actually be following Jesus. We're not doing it the way he would have done it. If the only people that want to have dinner with you are people in your church, right? So what are you actually doing to get close to people that Jesus would have actually gotten close to? So tangibly speaking, and I forgot your name. I met you when you first walked in. David? Oh, Sean. We have the same name. That's right. So one of the things that we did was we started inviting people over to our house for barbecues. We had a wiffle ball tournament on 4th of July because that's what normal people do. And I did not ask them to come to church. I did not tell them that I was a preacher. Like when I go to Little League games, you know what kills conversations? When another Little League dad says, "So what do you do for work?" So I started saying, "I work for a nonprofit." Is that a true statement? Yes or no? And dang it, that keeps the conversation going for the glory of Jesus. Because the moment I say I'm a preacher, they're like. There was one guy said, so he said, "Well, what nonprofit?" I said, "Well, a religious one?" No, I said, "Hey, have you heard of Grace Church?" And he goes, actually, it's this other guy. He said, "No, never heard about it." So, "You know the movie nights at the park?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "That's our church." He goes, "Oh, that's cool. I'll take my granddaughter to that one." So that was kind of cool. Like, that guy's far from God. He's not interested in God or church at all. But if God ever does grab his attention, I know where he'll show up, right? So that's kind of a cool thing. But this one guy, he actually owns a business here in the Avon Industrial Park. He said, "So why are you at this baseball game?" I said, "I'm watching my son." He goes, "You have a kid?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Does your church know you have a child?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like they know you've had sex?" And I'm like, "I'm married." He goes, "You're married?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Then he yells to his wife, "Mary, he's a priest and he's married. That's his kid." So that went well. You never tell us. So anyway, you gotta, like, what are you doing right now to actually put yourself in proximity to the people that God actually sent you here to reach? Because the truth is, if your faith isn't contagious, then the people in your church, their faith won't be contagious. You can't teach what you don't know, right? And you can't reproduce who you ain't. So it's okay for the people in my church to know that I leave the office every day at 2 o'clock because I need to be at Stoughton High by 2:30 because I'm the assistant JV soccer coach. And dang it, that's my job as a pastor. That's work time. I'm all right with that. If you ain't got kids at home, I don't know how you're going to reach people. Like, that was the easiest thing for me, is having kids, right? Because I just like go where my kids go and talk to their parents and become a friend. Just be a normal person. When somebody asks you to go to the bar, the answer is yes. Right? Yes or no? Jesus called a drunkard because he invited to places where people were abusing alcohol. And he went. Are you with me? If this is making you uncomfortable, you might not have like Jesus would have gone into buildings and you would have said, "I'll wait in a car." And Jesus would have left you there. He would have left you in a car. Now, if you have issues with this, seriously, if you're in recovery, then you know what people who are far from God respect? People who are in recovery. So you just throw that out there. Ain't nothing wrong with showing your vulnerability or your weakness. I'm in recovery, so I probably ought not to, but, we're cool. Or I don't know how you would handle that, but handle it like just be a normal person. Don't be a weirdo. Too many preachers are weirdos. Tweet that. How many of you guys know Christians that you're like, if you were like, I would never sit next to you on the T? Are you with me? Oh, gosh. Never mind. We have to train our mission trip kids when they come up because they want to go back and tell their church in Texas they led 4 people to the Lord. And we're like, please you're not allowed to talk to people in Boston. That's it. Just hand out the water bottle at the Little League games, but don't talk to nobody, right? Is the way that works. There's a tension between the familiarity and comfort that you feel with your Christian community versus the uncomfortable feeling of being an outsider around lost people. Here's why we crave hanging out with just Christians. Because that's our people. We feel comfortable there. We feel affirmed there. They know who we are there. And we don't like going to parties where we don't know anybody because it's awkward and uncomfortable, which is exactly the way they feel when they're in your church building. So ain't no way in the world you should ask them to do something you won't do for them. You go first. How about that? That's the reason why we don't want to do this. Because we feel uncomfortable here. Truthfully, if you've been a Christian for longer than 15, 20 years, and all you've done is just get cocooned with all other Christians, you don't know how to have normal conversations with people who don't share your faith anymore. So you need this more than everybody else even. Our street, kids, school, Little League, community, civic organizations, how are you making your neighborhood better? Start there. Your kids are in public school? Why didn't you volunteer to be on the school council? Why aren't you in the Rotary? Why aren't you in Kiwanis? Why aren't you in the business thing? I just went blank on it. No, the thing in everybody's neighborhood. What's that? The exchange? No. Chamber. Thank you. Chamber. There you go. Number 2 you need. Second thing you need is your posture needs to change. First thing that needs to change is your proximity. Second thing that needs to change is your posture. And for this, look at Jesus with the woman at the well. He knew for a fact she was living an immoral life. She was far from God. And if she died without turning from that sin, any sin, all sin, to place her faith and trust in Jesus, his death, burial, and resurrection, she was going to spend eternity separated from God. That's not how he walked up to her, is it? He walked up, found common ground. You know what she was there for? She was there for what? So what he said was what? Have a drink? Who took it religious? Him or her? She did. She said, how are you a Jew talking to me, a Samaritan? He said, well, if you knew what kind of water I had. Homeboy just throws out something awkward. She don't pick it up. Because she's like, all right, I got living water. You'll never thirst again. She's like, that's weird. I'm not even going to talk about that. You Jews say we got to worship in Jerusalem, but our ancestors say it's Samaria. What do you say? Jesus, all right, you want to talk religion? Let's go religion. And so he just takes it a little bit, answers her question, and puts one more step in the door. She opens it up. He puts one more step in there, right? She opens it up. If at any moment she'd started to put the door, that story wouldn't have even been in the Bible. How many other things did Jesus do that it didn't make it in the Bible simply because they didn't keep opening up the door? We don't know. The only reason we know about this story is when he put his foot in, she opened it up. When he started leaning in more, she kept opening it. But what he did not do? He did not give her a chick tract that scared her to death with faces melting off of everybody as they were bleeding and burning in hell. Dear Lord in heaven. Right? He didn't go straight from A to Z. I just broke my pen. I'm sorry. Just making sure the pen's not bleeding on me. But does that make sense? He took a humble posture with her and he let her lead how far this went spiritually. A couple things I want to tell you about this is, I skipped down to the demeanor you assume will determine the tone of the relationship. It's important for me to remember that my priority is to be their friend, not their pastor. This other Little League dad, he ain't looking for a pastor, but you know what he wants? A friend. I might not ever be his pastor, but you know what I can be? I can be his friend. You know what you can be? Their friend. Jesus was called the what of publicans and sinners? Friend. He's friend first, Savior second. If you ain't never willing to be their friend, you ain't never going to be their pastor. Allow your, and I think another tough thing that's about our posture is that we're uncomfortable being led by others, because in our churches, we're the leaders. But if you're going to get involved in school council, guess what? Nobody gives a rat's butt what you have to say. And you best be humble in that meeting. You best serve until they ask for your opinion. And we ain't used to that. We're used to stepping into situations and taking over. And that's going to alienate us from every single person we're actually trying to help come to Jesus. Am I right? So one of the biggest barriers to our posture, maintaining a posture of openness to people who are farthest from God, is that we're not willing to be led by other people. So try to become a part of their community before ever inviting them to be in yours. I want to be an asset to Stoyak whether anybody ever comes to Grace Church or not. And truthfully, it's because I am an asset to Stoyak that some of the other Little League dads start showing up at Grace Church. Two of my Stoyak buddy coaches, I've always coached against them. My kids have never been on the same team because they're coaches, and I'm a coach, which means that our boys will never be on the same team. But the way my posture toward them on Saturday mornings at Stoughton High and all of the other elementary schools in town has been enough that they were interested in bringing me into their life as a friend. We became friends for years before they ever started showing up at Grace Church. You know what's awesome? Last Sunday night, isn't that when was the last time Patriots played on Sunday night? That was 2 Sunday nights ago. I'm at one of their houses and I don't know if anybody there is a devoted follower of Jesus yet. I heard more F-bombs in an hour watching that game than there are in the movie Departed. And that's a lot of F-bombs. And you know what? You just roll with that. You just roll with that. Had one dude kind of half-lit, been to Grace Church 2 or 3 times because his girlfriend's mom comes here, could not talk to me without the F word, and then he remembered where he'd seen me. And he goes, "Are you the pastor at Grace Church?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm sorry for my effing cussing." Like in his apology, and that might have been the exact same, but in his apology for swearing, he swore. And I thought, this is like Jesus right now in heaven is going, that's funny, isn't it? I don't care who you are. That's funny. Don't let the brokenness of others threaten your identity as a healthy follower of Jesus. If they get drunk, if they get out of control, that don't need to threaten you. Like, you can be there. Why does that threaten your faith? Right? Like, this is exactly where you need to be. Third thing you need to change is your pattern of speech. Paul said, to the Jew, I'll be a Jew. To the Greek, I'll be a Greek. To the barbarian, I'll be a barbarian. Now, there's limits to this, I know. Right? Without sin. Without sin. But you need to deconstruct your religious terms and don't ever go back. So I don't talk about you need to be saved. They have no clue what that means. And I don't talk about them being lost. You know how my lost friends would identify themselves? If I said, are you lost? Are you unsaved? Are you spiritually disconnected from God? What would they self-identify as? Spiritually disconnected from God. So I don't use the word lost or unsaved when I'm preaching, because I wouldn't use those terms when I'm talking to them at a Little League game. So talk in the pulpit like you would talk on the bleachers. And if the way you talk in the bleachers, you'd be ashamed to talk then change the way you talk in the bleachers. Right? I don't use the word sin without defining it, because to most of my friends, sinners are people who abuse children. Sinners ain't somebody who doesn't serve their spouse. Right? So I say people who, what is sin? We worked a month on this. I'm going to give this to you for free. You know what sin is? Disobedience towards God and selfishness towards people. Everybody would admit they'd broken one of the commandments. And everybody will admit that they've been selfish a time or two. And that's the brokenness that's on the inside that keeps us disconnected from God. And until we let go of the brokenness, that's what I'm talking about. You see what I'm saying? Because everybody would recognize they have brokenness on the inside. So that's how we talk about it. So deconstruct your speech. To find out what we were doing that was disconnecting with people who are farthest from God, we went to taskrabbit.com and put out there that we were looking for somebody who would evaluate a public event for 3 hours, $20 an hour. We had 5 people respond to that. And then when they responded, then we told them it was a religious event. Then we had 3 of them that said they were interested in coming to that. Then we did an interview with them. I didn't. Brian Buford thought of this. That was the guy who introduced Sean earlier today. And then the guy said, well, I don't think you'd want me. We said, why? He said, because I'm a homosexual atheist. And we were like, jackpot. So that dude came to our church. Brian never told me when he was coming. What Brian wanted to see was how this guy was treated, what he felt when he came, and what he got and what he didn't get. Right? Went through the whole service, came 30 minutes early. I didn't even know, I didn't know that, I knew it was going to happen sometime in the next 6 weeks. But we have, however many visitors you have, you don't know which one of them is a homosexual atheist that's been paid to come to your church. So then they go through the whole thing and, they experience what we want, right? And then Brian interviews them afterwards, and we learned a ton. Cost us $60. You want an honest evaluation of how you're doing connected with the people farthest from God? Drop $60 and put your thick skin on. My job is not to take them to faith in Jesus. Whose job is that? That's right. God saves people. I don't. I don't save people. Jesus saves people. My job is to keep the conversation going. That's it. How many conversations? How many conversations it takes. We're going to have this conversation, and my goal is for this conversation to end without you thinking I'm a weirdo. You know why? So that we get one more conversation. Right? And I'll put it out there just a little bit. Just a little bit. And sometimes my friends will just go, come on in, let's talk about this. And other times my friends, they change the subject. I change the subject too. Who's more interested in them getting saved? Jesus or me? Who's the pressure on? It's on Jesus, not me. My job's just to move the chains. I ain't got to score a touchdown every play. I just don't want to fumble the ball. That's it. Don't fumble. Don't fumble. Hand the ball off, get your 4 yards, run a different play. This time it's a sweep. Next time it's a cross across the middle. Next time, right? You might find every once in a while you get to throw a long one down a field. But most of this game is played 10 yards at a time. 10 yards at a time. Friends talk to friends about meaningful things. Everybody talks about God. They just only want to talk to God. Talk about God to people they're cool with. Your job is to be the people they're cool with. Everybody talks about God. If they don't want to talk to God about God to you, then you got work to do. Don't be afraid to nudge the conversation, but be careful. Direct others through questions rather than directions. Ask them questions. Jesus asked questions, didn't he? Isn't that how he led people? Somebody asks us a question, we go into a 15-minute sermon, and they stopped listening 14 minutes ago. People don't have conversations like that. Now you're just being a jerk. I don't want to hang out with you, and I'm a preacher. You know they don't. Just be a normal person, right? Trust God. Put yourself out there. So it's your proximity, it's your posture, it's your patterns of speech. I got about 3-4 minutes for questions. Sean, did I answer your question? I gave you a few. Okay. Yes, sir? I'm sorry? I talk about what I did this past week. I talk about the time I'm spending in Little League. Everybody at Grace Church knows that I'm a soccer coach at Stoughton High. Am I right? You guys know that? That comes up all the time. They know that I play Call of Duty. They know that Black Ops 4, and I'm freaking good at that. I am. They know that I'm on school council. I was on school council. Actually, no, I just got put on school council for the high school now with Miss Miller. She's the principal. So I talk about, like I'll say, hey, Dave Massarelli, my neighbor across the street. And they're like, oh, that's his neighbor comes here? How long you been coming, Dave? And I might tell a story how Dave was in my living room. He and Michelle were about to get a divorce. And he was bawling. And he was like, it's my fault, it's my fault. And that opened up a conversation about sin in his own heart. And like that guy went from 0 to 100 And actually, had been a lot of other conversations before. His wife said to my wife at the holiday fair at the Lutheran church, well, I guess you heard Dave's all born again now. And Billie Jane was like, uh-huh. He says, so I guess you think I'm next. And Billie Jane goes, I don't know. Like, what do you do with that? And that next summer, Michelle came to faith in Jesus, and they were both baptized. So, I mean, like, when you tell these it's stories, but if you ain't doing it, you got no stories to share. The culture represents the way we lead them, right? And who we are. It's not what you say, it's who you are. Good questions.
I had a question on the people that you hired. You were paid what their response was afterwards, after
The people I hired for what? To work on our staff?
paid $20, right?
Oh, yeah. So it turns out he loved it. He said, like, if I was religious, I would keep coming. The one thing that we got back from, because, like, we work really hard on this. So it was very affirming, all the stuff that he said. The one thing that was a disconnect is that our connection center is for first-timers to come back, get a gift bag, and then introduce. I just want to say thanks for coming. If you showed up today in need, you came to the right church. So if you need groceries in your pantry, about to have your utilities shut off, or your kids need sneakers, we can help you today because of the generosity of everybody you're sitting around. So we're going to pass the baskets, but we're not trying to take from you. We want to be a blessing to you, but we can't read your mind. So if you need to be blessed, come see us. That was the only thing that stuck out. So he thought you come back to the connection center if you need food. I was like, because it's not just that. That's where you also come to meet the pastor. It's also where we don't do altar calls. We want you to come to the connection center because we want to spend more time. Because what happens at an altar call, they start playing the music in the band, and you realize, I got to get off this stage so they can start singing and shut this bad boy down, and you're going to rush the conversation and ruin it. So we try to do that in the side. So we realized that we weren't communicating what that room was for very well. That was the worst that we got. I'll say this. We're so passionate about this proximity, posture, and patterns of speech, that all of our pastoral staff are required to have a side hustle. Ken works every single morning from 5 to 10 at LA Fitness. He opens the gym. Now, he did that at the beginning because we couldn't afford to pay him. But once we could, he asked if he should quit that. And I said, no, half the people that walk in the door say, you're the guy from LA Fitness. Why in the world would I want to take away the one connection you have to everybody who's farthest from God? He said, do I have to give the church that money? And I was like, no, bless your family with it. I don't care. Just get your job done. So nobody's a clock puncher here. I'm going to give you 40, 50 hours worth of responsibilities. You get your stuff done. I don't care when you get it done. Our worship guy for a while worked at the Apple store in the mall. I coach. Brian Buford does business stuff, and in January he's starting a once a month like a business, like an entrepreneurs group at Grace Church. And Taylor has a printing company, and he does real estate. And I want everybody to have a side hustle. You know why? Because preachers who only hang out with Christians get weird. Last 2 questions, and then we got to shut it down. I'm 1 minute over. Yeah.
And you're among them now, and
Yeah.
one of them. Can you talk a little bit about how you process through that when you make mistakes, you sin, you mess up?
Yeah. Good question. What was your question?
Well, what happened when your church is about 45 minutes away from where you live?
You need to move. You can't pastor people you don't know. Sorry, that was a real quick. I just knew I could hit that one real quick. Seriously, or start a church in the town you actually live in and hand that off to some guy you're mentoring. That question is that's easy. I don't care. Everybody here can know my flaws. They're just not going to know all the details about my flaws. And that's honestly self-preservation. I don't want anybody to find out something about me and I lose my job because they thought I was perfect. If I did something stupid here, everybody's going to go, oh yeah, I figured that. That's Sean. Right? Like it's okay for me to be broken, right? But what I need to be is honest and repentant. That's what I need to be. I'm repentant. How many sins can you tolerate before you repent to God? If there's even a number, it's too many. Sins like poop on your shoes. The moment you step in it, what do? You wipe it off. If you step in it 8 times a day, what will you do 8 times a day? Wipe it off. That's holiness. All right. You guys got like 4 minutes to make it your next thing. You guys are dismissed. Thanks for sticking around.